Hello and welcome to Telesur. I'm Ian Bruce and this is Interviews from Quito, the program where we explore some of the big challenges facing this country and the region. In today's program, we look at the legacy of the Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez, not just for his country, but for the whole of Latin America. 6 years after his death, how far do his ideas of sovereignty, dignity, and even socialism live on in the region? To discuss this, we're joined by Mario Ramos, Director of the Andean Center for Strategic Studies. But first, let's take a look at this video.
On February the 4th of 1992, Commander Hugo Chavez sealed a pact of love and loyalty with the Venezuelan people. A pact that has never been broken, with full commitment and humility. He never betrayed his people nor let them down, and neither did his people.
I have seen and I have felt that the love between us, the love for what is ours, the love of our people for the revolution has only grown. And many times I have said the words of José Martí, love is rewarded with love.
With loyal people by his side from the beginning, he became immortal in Venezuelan history. Thanks to his hard work as president, Venezuela is considered to be at the forefront of respecting the dignity and sovereignty of people, becoming an example for a huge number of nations.
We have received the most tragic of news. At 4:25 p.m. on March 5th, our commander, Hugo Chavez Frias, has passed away.
The tragic news of his death broke millions of hearts. Amidst the pain, Venezuelan people swore loyalty to the continuation of the revolution, awakening patriotism and dignity among them. The entire world expressed solidarity with the Venezuelan people, recognizing the magnitude of Commander Chavez's work, which was achieved out of love for his country and also for humanity. He accomplished Simón Bolívar's dream of returning dignity to the invisible and to build a big, prosperous and sovereign country.
I am no longer Chavez. Chavez is a people. Chavez are millions. You too are Chavez. Venezuelan woman, you too are Chavez. Venezuelan youth, you too are Chavez. Venezuelan child, you too are Chavez. Venezuelan soldier, you too are Chavez.
Commander Chavez left a legacy of unwavering fight for the Bolivarian revolution, a fight that despite difficulties, people refused to give up. They refused to walk backwards on all that has been achieved during the revolutionary process.
Thank you very much, Mario. I want to talk about Hugo Chavez's legacy in the region, in Ecuador, across Latin America. But let's start by going back to when he was first elected in 1999. What was it that he brought that was new?
Let us remember that the region at that moment was governed by neoliberal governments. And we were trying to get away from the fall of the socialist bloc, so there was no political horizon or ideological. And Chavez's victory at that moment was important because it brought new ways for the left wing, for progressiveness, for democracy. And the strategy that he implemented shed some light so that later left-wing organizations could implement this strategy and be able to reach power, and then leading to the 1 decade with a new government, where almost all of South America became a left-wing area with left-wing governments, with the exception of Colombia, basically, as well as Peru. But this also led to the creation of a new regionalism. It encouraged the development of the multipolar world, and Chavez was someone who fostered this new regionalism. Chavez created the UNASUR, Petrocaribe, ALBA.
All those things later, but just in those early years, he himself changed. The Bolivarian process changed in those early years, didn't it? Because I think when in 1999 people thought, oh, that's interesting, you know, progressive, but people weren't very clear what Chavez represented outside of Venezuela. How did that develop? You know, up to, I think in 2005, beginning of 2005, he talked about socialism for the first time. How did that process develop?
Bueno, Chávez
was a leftist. Before even winning the election, he knew about Marxism. He had a nationalist thought, considering that this in Latin America is against empire. It's not nationalism of Europe and other parts of the planet. So here we need to be nationalist and therefore anti-imperialist. So the one who realized this from the beginning of this way of thinking, of this new way of acting, of these new policies of Chavez was Fidel. And when Fidel invited him to Cuba, he welcomed him almost as a president. So the left wing in Latin America didn't understand, and due to their schemes, the military dictatorships and whatnot, they couldn't understand or were unable to understand the possibility of how interesting this Bolivarian process was. And this is what was very interesting. He rescued Bolivar. And this is the core topic for the thoughts of the Bolivarian Revolution. Bolivar and the way he thought of fighting against the empire and what this reflected. But also, beyond this, I did not mention this before, he created the idea of 21st century socialism, of renewed socialism. So, as I mentioned previously, there was political and ideological pressure due to all the turmoil. There was no perspective to go to. So Chavez was strategic, pivotal, because he shed some light to the political struggles of the peoples of Latin America. And for this, I reckon that the importance of the victory of Chavez in 1999 was due to.
Socialism of the 21st century was used so much, but a lot of people weren't quite sure what they meant by it. So what were the principal characteristics of this socialism of the 21st century as Chavez envisaged it?
Chavez implemented a participatory democracy. The fact of having a peaceful revolution through elections, by earning himself the willingness of the people, the legitimacy of the people through elections, then this created the right of going through a process that was fighting for legitimacy. Chavez was the first one to implement the taking away of power. It was the first time used, and he won this election after being subject to the possibility of having the power taken away from him. So this is democratical, and this was new, because it was interpreted that the socialist bloc, mainly of the Eastern European countries, had a political system of a dictatorship. But here it was different. Here it was democratic. So he brought back democracy and implemented a new democracy. And this is what we've seen in Venezuela. 25 elections where the official party has only lost 2. And through this, they have been able to build this new idea of socialism. This is a democratic socialism.
It wasn't just winning elections, it was also about participatory democracy.
The concept of participatory democracy is creating the power for the people, and this is pivotal, because if we only think about elections, then we can also think about some of the processes that have taken place in Latin America. For example, the pathetic case of Ecuador. Here, we did not create a new social movement, we did not create a real political party. No. And we see the results that are taking place as of today. And the Venezuelan process is different because there in that country, they try to develop political awareness, political training for the people, direct participation of the people, and other characteristics. So it's very similar to the Cuban process due to these features. That's why it's so solid and has been able to withstand all the attacks of imperialism. This is the main characteristic of participatory democracy that has been taken by Venezuela.
Comparison with Ecuador here. Before 2007, before the arrival of Rafael Correa, how did the left, how did progressive sectors here in Ecuador view what was going on in Venezuela and Chavez?
Como dije,
As I
no se
mentioned,
comprendía a Chávez. Lo único
Chavez
que
was not
tuvo la
understood.
visión
The only one who had the vision of this character in his all dimension was Fidel Castro.
comprendiendo
He
las
was the only
características
one
del
who
proceso
was able
venezolano
to
en su
understand the characteristics of the
verdadera
Venezuelan
dimensión.
process in its real
No es que
dimension.
se fue radicalizado progresivamente.
And
Yo
it
creo que esa no
did
es la
not
descripción,
become
sino
radical.
que
I don't think this is
se
the
van
way
creando
of describing it.
condiciones para la
But new
radicalización
conditions
del proceso.
were
Es
created
diferente.
to make
Sí,
a
no se
stronger
puede hacer
process,
la
and this is
transformación en un
different.
día, como decía.
Transformation
Los
cannot happen in a day.
es un proceso.
This
Sí,
is a
reformas,
process with reforms,
hasta
more
producir
reforms,
cambios cualitativos.
until
Y eso es
qualitative
lo que ha
changes
hecho
can be
Venezuela.
produced.
Es un
And this
proceso ordenado,
was the case of
pero
Venezuela, an
con-
ordered
pero con
process,
emboscadas. En ese
but
sentido,
with certain
ha sido muy
ambushes, you
afectado por
understand?
toda la
And it
agresión
has been
de
affected
Estados Unidos.
by all the attacks of the
No.
United States.
La diferencia con Ecuador
The difference with Ecuador
básicamente
basically
aquí
relies on
la
the fact that
izquierda
here,
entendía
the left wing
lo que es la democracia participativa.
understood
Pero una
what
cosa es
participation in
concepto
democracy
y otra cosa
was.
es
But
llevarlo a la
one thing is a
Es muy
concept
diferente.
and one
Chávez
thing
era
is
un
the
estratega.
practice. It's different.
Sí.
Chavez was strategist.
Aquí tuvimos un presidente que
Chavez
demostró
was
no
a
ser-
strategist. Here, our president was not a strategist because we're seeing the
No se
clear
construyó
results.
las herramientas, los pilares
We
básicos
did
para
not
que un
build
proceso
the
de
basic
carácter
tools,
revolucionario
the basic
tenga
foundations
continuidad en el tiempo.
for a process
Debemos
to be
empezar
continuous
de la
through
muerte de
time.
Chávez,
And regardless of
bolivariano
Chavez, that the
continuado.
Bolivarian process has continued through
Did have an
time.
influence on Rafael Correa, didn't he?
A ver, yo diría,
I would say,
¿cómo fue esa influencia?
what was this influence?
Vemos que
We
no
see
fue tan
that it
profunda, no
wasn't
fue tan
as
consciente.
deep or as
Siempre los líderes
conscious.
políticos
Always
son-
political
tienen su
leaders
característica medio
have
egocentrista, medio
a certain
grotesca,
characteristic related
¿no?
to their
Y
ego.
me parece que me hubiese gustado
And
que
I-
Chávez influya más en
I
Corea,
would have loved to see
pero parece que no fue así,
more
porque
influence of Chavez in Korea, but apparently it was not the
Te lo
case
digo,
because,
cuestiones básicas
well, this is due
para
to
que un
basic
proceso
matters.
de transformación
For a process of
real
transformation,
cale y tenga
to go
continuidad en el
deep,
tiempo, aquí no se
to
hicieron.
grow roots, it was something that never
se
happened
copió, por
here.
decirlo de alguna
This
manera,
was not
debió haber
copied.
copiado por lo
It
menos
should
lo
have
que se
been
hizo
copied, at
en-
least
en Venezuela,
what happened in
¿no?
Venezuela,
Copiar bien.
and copy this in the
What
right
are
way.
common themes? I mean, not just in Ecuador, say Bolivia, the process of change in Bolivia. Neither that nor the citizens' revolution here in Ecuador, or perhaps other processes in Latin America, would have been possible without Chavez, would they? No?
Sí, justamente uno de los temas
Indeed,
que implementó Chávez fue la
one
Asamblea
of the things
Constituyente.
that were implemented
Eso
by
llevó a
Chavez
cabo
was the
que
Constituent
Bolivia y
Assembly.
Ecuador copien esa estrategia.
And both
Digamos,
Bolivia
hizo
and
una
Ecuador
asamblea
copied this
constituyente,
strategy. Here we
en Bolivia se
created
formó una asamblea
a
constituyente,
constituent assembly just
transformaron
like
las
in
reglas de juego de
Bolivia.
esa democracia
They changed the
formal,
rules of this
¿cierto?
formal
Era una democracia
democracy,
restringida,
of this
y
restricted
se
democracy,
permitió crear un nuevo sistema político.
and we were allowed
Eso
to create a
permitió,
new
en cierta
political
manera, también
system.
las victorias electorales
And it
en el
was
caso de
also
Ecuador
through
y
the
Bolivia.
electoral
Entonces,
victories
eso
of
fue
Ecuador and
inspirado en el
Bolivia.
proceso
And this was
bolivariano
inspired in the
proceso.
Bolivarian process of
Chávez
Venezuela.
dio esa pauta.
Chavez was the one who provided the
theme
guidelines.
of anti-imperialism, of regional integration, were common as well, right?
Sí, pero el motor del,
Yes.
del nuevo regionalismo, del
However, the
imperialismo, de
engine
crear
of the
nuevas
new
estructuras
revolution
independientes de la OEA
going against
fue Chávez.
the
Él esperó
empire, going against the
que tuvo
OAS
como
was
socio,
Chavez.
a Lula,
And his
¿sí?
main ally was
Y
Lula,
claro,
Lula
o
da
sea,
Silva.
Vemos que
And we can see
realmente
that the one who really
construyó
built
esa nueva geopolítica
this
fue
new
Chávez.
political
Y
ideology
con la
was
muerte de
Hugo
Chávez,
Chavez.
y
And
con la
after
pérdida
Chavez's
de las
death,
elecciones en Brasil,
and after
y en
losing the
Argentina con Néstor
elections
Kirchner, perdió mucho
in Brazil
impulso.
and in Argentina with
A
Nestor
pesar de que
Kirchner,
todavía,
lost a lot of power.
Correa
Even
estaba en el
though
gobierno.
Correa was still
Evo, sigue
in
el
office,
gobierno, y
was
otros
still in office,
partidos de izquierda
and
gobernaron.
other left-wing parties were
perdió
governing
mucho
in the
impulso
region.
en la- en
But
la-
a
en la
lot of
solidez
this
de la
boost
construcción de
was
UNASUR,
lost in
¿sí?
the
Por ejemplo. Pero
strength of UNASUR
porque se requiere
because
de una visión estratégica.
because you need
de
to
una
have a
comprensión
strategic
geopolítica.
vision, a
Había que
geopolitical
impulsar el
understanding.
mundo multipolar.
A multipolar
no solo
world
es
needed to
cuestión
be
de hacer una
encouraged.
buena
It's not
gestión,
only about good
nacional,
management
pública,
of
como el caso
national
de
politics, as
presidente
the case
Correa,
of President
que llevó a
Correa,
cabo una buena gestión pública,
who had a
una
very
gestión
good
nacional.
internal
Llevó,
management of the country.
digamos, hizo un buen gobierno.
He
Y
had
no
a
solo
good
es eso,
government.
no-
But it's
no-
not
no-
only
no
about
son
that.
los países no son una isla en el
Countries
mundo.
are not an
Si no
island.
se tiene,
They're
si
not
no se
isolated.
contribuye
if you don't contribute to change the correlation of forces, not only in your country but also internationally, this will be lost. And this is what we are going through. We've lost this due to the influence of international forces. There's no support right now that could help national processes. We've lost a lot on this sense. We see that a strategic construction for resistance of the strikes of imperialism in Venezuela has been Petrocaribe. And no one paid attention to the smallest islands, the smallest countries, but it is a vote at the OES, and this has changed the correlation of forces at the Organization of American States, which is controlled by the United States of America. And this has allowed the countries to defend against the attacks that have taken place against Venezuela, and this is a political vision that Chavez had.
The geopolitical vision. What about beyond Latin America? In Venezuela now, they like to talk about Hugo Chavez as a universal figure, his universal legacy. Did he have a big impact beyond Latin America?
Yes, he had an impact, because when you build an anti-imperialist process, a solid one like the one in Venezuela, you're also contributing for the change in the whole world. You are going for the construction of a multipolar world. You are weakening the hegemony of imperialism. And this is important. And even today, after all the losses of left-wing parties in the last elections, the influence of the Bolivarian process is still very important. That's why the bad example needs to be eliminated, and that's why there's an attack against Venezuela. The same thing happened with the revolution of Iran. The regional influence was very important. That's why Iran was permanently attacked. Sanctions against Iran, sanctions against Venezuela. These two countries are very similar from a geopolitical perspective. So if you take away the hegemonic control of the United States in a region they consider as theirs, as the United States just mentioned, they say that this is our hemisphere, these are our countries. So taking away their hegemony and their control is extremely important. And Venezuela has been also support for Cuba. Another country has been permanently attacked. So this is a team that has been created. The axis of evil, to add some words to it, between Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. They don't speak about Bolivia, but it's also on target, and that's why they want to end with them. And they've mentioned this publicly without trying to cover it. They say that they want to reconfigure Latin America by destroying processes of Venezuela
in the last 4
and
or 5
Nicaragua.
years, Venezuela has been even more under attack. The economy has been severely attacked from within and from without. The political attacks have been constant, the diplomatic attacks, and now even the threat of military aggression. Do you think Hugo Chavez, how do you think Hugo Chavez would have, if he'd still been alive, would have responded to that?
Many of the lines that are being encouraged by Maduro right now were inspired by Chavez. For example, the petro currency. In order to try and tackle the financial attacks was a proposal of Chavez. Chavez was also under attacks. Remember the coup d'etat in 2002, the 62-day strike of the companies, sabotage against PDVSA. So Chavez also was able to face these severe attacks. Nevertheless, the attacks have been tougher recently, and Maduro has done things right. He has continued insisting with this. And due to the fact there's a multipolar world right now, there are certain allies that allow him to continue to resist, as Russia, as China, that allow him to withstand this attack. And I think that the main issues are in the historical past of Venezuela, a structure that depends widely on oil, an economy that's not diversified, and changing this economic structure does not take 10 or 20 years.
Chavez tried to do that and didn't succeed.
Yes, also a cultural problem. Chavez tried to do this, but it's not only about creating a factory for shoes and we're no longer importing shoes. No, it's also about a cultural matter. I should buy Venezuelan shoes instead of American shoes. So looking for cultural change is not easy. And I think that history is amazing at some points. And all these attacks that the Venezuelan population is under is related to this change that they have to be placed under duress because they finally feel the attack. They finally feel the possibility of a military invasion, which has raised awareness in many citizens. And it's likely that the processes that are there, that are part of the government processes of Nicolás Maduro, could happen quicker because this is human nature. When you are under a threat, you try to make some changes, and cultural changes and economic and productive changes can happen
Mario, we're almost
swifter.
out of time. Just to finish, in 20, 30 years' time, beyond this present conjuncture, this present situation, how will the world remember Hugo Chavez?
We will remember Hugo Chavez as a patriot of Latin America, as a patriot at the highest levels that have been bred by Latin America, Sandino, Che Guevara, Bolivar, and Martí. We will remember him as a patriot of this kind because he gave so much to this independence, the independence that the peoples of America want to have. He also provided so much to build a region in a sovereign way, for the self-determination of our peoples. He gave his life for this. He also provided a lot of strategic guidelines for this matter that are there and could be taken back in the short or mid-term. I think that Chavez will be remembered as one of the heroes of Latin America at the highest level, at a strategic and historical level in our America. This is how he will be remembered.
Thank you very much indeed, Mario. We've been talking to Mario Ramos from the Andean Center for Strategic Studies about the legacy of Hugo Chavez 6 years after he passed on, for the continued fight for sovereignty and peace here in Latin America. This is Interviews from Quito. I'm Ian Bruce. Thank you for watching. Until next time.